Hey, it's Michelle, and I want to talk to you today about if you struggle with your relationship with food, three reasons why you might be struggling, and some tips and things you can do to actually shift your relationship with food. I'm thinking about this right now because it's January 15th as I'm recording this. And so we're a couple of weeks into the new year and a time when a lot of people are kind of thinking about cleaning up their relationship with food and their diet. I know I'm doing a whole 30 this month after the holidays, right? We all kind of need a reset after maybe indulging a little bit too much over the holidays and coming into the new year feeling like we want to be that best version of ourselves. And for a lot of people, that means maybe cleaning up their diet, eating better, maybe losing weight or whatever, having more energy, whatever your goals are. A lot of times we're thinking about food this time of year and how to change our relationship with it. But if you're really struggling with your relationship with food, like you need to eat better, but you're struggling with craving sugar or carbs, or maybe you're just struggling with binge eating, or maybe you're just overeating, right? You're eating normal meals, but you're just kind of overdoing it a little bit. You need to kind of cut back. We can struggle with this relationship we have with food, right? It's not just a relationship where we know we need to eat something, so we just put fuel in our body like we're putting gas in the tank of our car and then going on with our lives, right? We have a relationship with food that can really impact our choices that we then make when it comes to food. And so, again, I have struggled with this for many years throughout my life. And so, I want to talk to you about three reasons why we might struggle with changing our relationship with our food. And when you understand this, it's really empowering because I know when I struggled with an eating disorder as a teenager, and then actually a little bit later in life, I found myself struggling with some unwanted eating patterns as well, that I'll share more about. I felt really guilty about my eating habits. I felt really bad about myself. I felt a lot of self-loathing and disempowered with my relationship with food. But it was understanding these things that I'm going to share with you that really shifted my ability to have control over my relationship with food and have a good relationship with food, which is what we all want. So, number one, if you're struggling with your relationship with food, I want you to think about how your nervous system response is probably playing a significant role here in any kind of unwanted eating patterns that might be showing up in your life. Now, when I say nervous system response, we know that the nervous system controls the show, as I like to say. What do I mean by that? Well, our nervous system basically has one job, right? It's there to keep us feeling safe. And it's kind of like an operating system we might have on like our laptop or computer, always running in the background and always kind of like checking for, malware or viruses or whatever it is that, our operating systems do. We don't really have to think about it, right? We don't see it going on, but it's there. It's always kind of running the show, keeping things going, looking out for any kind of a threat. And that is what your nervous system is doing all the time, even though you may not be aware of it, because our nervous system has one job, that is to keep us safe in our body. And there can be different reasons why, of course, we may not feel safe in our body. We may have developed some patterns of not feeling safe due to different situations or trauma that we've experienced in life. Some of it's biology, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But just thinking of your nervous system response. When we're in a parasympathetic response, right, that is that rest and digest place where our nervous system is relaxed, calm, engaged with life, and we feel good. We feel like we're safe. But if we're in a stress response, and this is a nervous system response where we don't feel safe, right? There's some kind of threat that our nervous system is sensing, whether it's real or perceived. We are in a place of sympathetic activation. Our stress response is turned on. And I want you to understand that this shifts everything that's happening in the body. Your hormones, your blood sugar, which we'll talk about in a moment, your energy production, all of it is going to be impacted. And that is why I like to say your nervous system really does run the show. And so when you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed or anxious, right, you might be in this fight or flight sympathetic response of your nervous system. There's one more state of the nervous system a lot of people aren't even aware of. I know I wasn't for many years. And this really was the state that I found myself stuck in. It's the chronic freeze response or the dorsal vagal freeze response when any kind of stressor becomes too overwhelming, right? We don't have the capacity or the energy to handle whatever's coming our way. Maybe it's just because we've been in a stress response for so long that our body can't maintain that kind of high energy state of the sympathetic response. We go into overwhelm, a freeze pattern, which looks like low energy. You might use words like feeling down and depressed, not having the capacity or energy to get up and do things, or just kind of going through the motions in life and not really being able to step into that place of feeling calm, alert, engaged with life that is that parasympathetic response we all want to be in. So I want you to recognize that number one, your nervous system can play a pretty significant role in your eating patterns because whenever we're dysregulated, we're in a chronic stress response or a chronic freeze pattern, we often look for coping mechanisms to help us with the state of dysregulation and discomfort that comes with these different states. When I think about the sympathetic response, I think about how anxiety often accompanies this response. And anyone who experiences chronic anxiety is probably stuck in a chronic pattern here with their nervous system. And it's an uncomfortable place to be, right? Nobody wants to be feeling anxious all the time. So what do? We look for ways to disconnect from our body so we don't have to feel what we're feeling or to try to calm our system down. And food is one of the most common coping mechanisms we use to help with a dysregulated nervous system. I think it makes a lot of sense. If you think about when we were born as babies, the first thing we were given when we cried was food, right? We were given milk and we were held, and there was a sense of comfort and our needs were met. And so, food can be a really comforting thing, a really useful, I guess we'll say, coping mechanism when it's used correctly. But often we begin to use food as a replacement for other ways of regulating our nervous system in the absence of maybe healthy relationships or other tools that could help us with staying regulated. We might just eat because we're bored, right? That can be a nervous system response as well. So I want you to be thinking about your nervous system response whenever you're reaching for food and maybe not sure if you're truly hungry or not, or find yourself maybe reaching for food as a coping mechanism and finding these unwanted eating patterns showing up in your life. But this is also related to the second reason why we often reach for food when we're struggling with our relationship with food. And again, might show up as craving sugar or carbs or salt or salty foods, or maybe we're just like overeating or we're binge eating, or maybe we're not even eating enough, which can also be a nervous system response. And this second reason, it's related to your biology, specifically your ability to regulate your blood sugar. And I see this all the time in the women that I work with. So many people are actually walking around with blood sugar dysregulation and they don't even know it. They don't recognize it for what it is. But this is pretty significant. In fact, I always kind of screen my clients for any signs of blood sugar imbalance that might be showing up because I know it's so foundational to regulating their nervous system and their biology that we have to make sure that this is happening, right? We're keeping that blood sugar stable. And when it's not stable, we go into a stress response, right? Cortisol is our stress hormone. We actually release more cortisol when our blood sugar is low because that's part of what cortisol does. It helps to bring our blood sugar back up. And this is a life or death situation, actually, right? If our blood sugar drops too low, it's a serious threat. So our nervous system response kicks in and we go into that stress response. This is one reason why a lot of the women I work with also find themselves waking up in the middle of the night, like that 2 to 4 a.m. kind of time frame. Sometimes our blood sugar is crashing around that time because we haven't eaten all night. So we wake up feeling anxious or irritable. We can't fall back asleep. I always suspect blood sugar issues when someone tells me they're having trouble with sleep and they're waking up in the middle of the night, especially if there's anxiety attached to it because of that cortisol response. There can be a lot of reasons why our blood sugar is imbalanced. It could just be the way we're eating. I worked with a client just this week who had a lot of signs of blood sugar imbalance. And so as we were working together, I kind of asked about her eating habits. And she's a really busy professional, and she was sometimes skipping lunch or not eating enough. And then she would get to, dinner time and she would just be starving. She'd even be snacking while trying to make dinner because she was so hungry, and even finding herself craving, sweets or eating later into the evening, and then feeling really bad about, kind of these behaviors that were showing up, and they were impacting her energy and her weight, and some other unwanted symptoms were showing up for her anxiety. And so for her, really, the most important thing she could do was just to eat regular meals, right? Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, so that she was keeping her blood sugar stable throughout the day. Because when you skip that meal, your blood sugar crashes. Then, you eat something, it spikes up, right? It's really detrimental to your nervous system, but it's also really hard on your body. And related to this could also be a nutrient deficiencies, or multiple nutrient deficiencies actually playing a role here, because if we're not getting enough nutrients, if we're eating maybe a diet that's high in processed foods, kind of low nutrient density in the diet, your body is just craving the nutrients it needs to create energy. And so we find ourselves wanting to eat more. And these nutrient deficiencies can be related to the third reason why we often find ourselves with these unwanted behaviors around food. And that is because it can be related to your neurotransmitter function. Neurotransmitters, those are those feel-good chemicals in the brain like serotonin, dopamine, endorphins. And if we're deficient in any of these neurotransmitters, we can actually have some unwanted food and coping mechanisms show up around food, like craving carbs and sugar. I always suspect a client might be low in serotonin if they tell me they're kind of craving sugar or carbs in the late afternoon or evening, and low endorphins, right? This was something I dealt with. I told you I had an eating disorder as a teenager. I was able to overcome that. But later in life, I found myself going through a divorce and moving to a new home with my three kids. It was a really just stressful time in my life. And I found myself in the kitchen at night after I put my kids to bed, grabbing a jar of peanut butter and a bag of chocolate chips and just eating. And, again, I felt really disappointed in myself, ashamed, um, angry at myself for this behavior. But I really felt like I couldn't stop. And it was definitely related to my nervous system response, right? I felt a lot of anxiety. I wasn't actually hungry. And I also recognized that I had some patterns of low neurotransmitters. I did some things I'll tell you about in a few minutes to support both of those things. And that actually was able to help me shift out of that pattern of reaching for food before bed and kind of overeating and eating a bunch of sugar and junk. So, low serotonin, again, can look like cravings for sugar or carbs, especially late afternoon or evening. Low endorphins, I think more in terms of craving like chocolate, also sugar, but mainly like really feeling like you need that food for comfort, right? Like endorphins are those feel good chemicals in the brain. Like if you ever have had a runner's high, right? For people who like to get out and do some jogging, and it feels so good to jog or exercise. Those are because your endorphins are kicking in. So they're kind of that comfort that we feel when we release endorphins we can get from eating food as well. Now, if someone has more of a low dopamine pattern, they might be reaching for food for just kind of like focus or mental energy. This is a person who I find often needs some coffee to kind of get their focus and get their mind in a place where they can get things done. Or sugar can also be a really helpful tool, right? When we're low in dopamine. So we find ourselves in this place of having these unwanted patterns around food. And sometimes it's just because our nervous system is really dysregulated and maybe we don't have other tools. I remember how back when I was struggling with my relationship with food, I really didn't have any other tools at the time to know what to do in order to regulate my nervous system, to feel safe in my body. And that took some work and some practice to learn. But once I did that, I didn't find that I needed to reach for food as a coping mechanism anymore when I did feel anxious or overwhelmed. So, I want to share with you some tips on how to fix your relationship with food. Where do you start? Because if you recognize that it's your nervous system, it's your biology, your blood sugar, maybe low neurotransmitters sound like they might be playing a role here, there's so much we can do to shift this pattern. And I want you to see as well that we're not even talking about necessarily how to eat or when to eat. I mean, all those things can be helpful, right? We need those 3 meals a day to regulate blood sugar, but it's more about what's happening internally that is actually going to shift the outward behaviors that we want to change with food. So the first thing to do is to really get curious. What do you notice when you feel that urge to eat? Are you really hungry? Again, this was something that I started practicing when I was struggling with my relationship with food. And I was actually amazed to realize I was not hungry at all when I was going into the kitchen and grabbing that jar of peanut butter and that bag of chocolate chips. I started learning how to feel what I was feeling, and it was not hunger, it was anxiety that I was feeling. And this is something I teach my students in my herbs and adaptogens for stress, sleep, mood, and hormone balance program, how to start working with nervous system regulation tools and feeling what we're actually feeling. Because then we can start to regulate the nervous system response. And again, there are so many tools that we can use to do this. And we need to learn how to use some of these new tools. But one of my favorites is starting with some gentle support with herbal support because it works on all of these levels. It can help us with dropping into the body, becoming more regulated. But we can also work with herbs to support neurotransmitters. I use herbs like nervines and nootropics, as well as certain amino acids and other supplements that really help support our ability to make neurotransmitters. I'm thinking of things like bacopa and lemon balm and ashwagandha, right? We know ashwagandha, for example, is GABAergic. It helps to create GABA, which is another neurotransmitter that when we are low in GABA, we feel a lot of anxiety. So we can support this with herbs. Herbs are also very nutritive, right? We know nutrient deficiencies can lead to cravings for food. So if we're bringing in more nutrients into the system, then we can really support our ability to stay regulated on this internal level that's impacting our nervous system response. And that goes back to just eating enough as well, right? I already mentioned making sure you're getting 3 meals a day, making sure you're getting enough protein. We make neurotransmitters from protein. That's why amino acid supplements sometimes can make a big difference in regulating our neurotransmitter response to stress. So, getting enough protein, healthy fats, getting some fiber from your veggies. I really like to think of it as putting in a lot of the good stuff into your body that your body needs and kind of shifting that idea of, being on a diet, which often can feel like we're depriving ourselves or starving ourselves or, we'll only be happy when we eat a certain way or we weigh a certain amount. Instead, kind of shifting your relationship with food in terms of how you think about nourishing your body with good, healthy food. Even if you're struggling with, eating maybe sugar or carbs later in the day, start your day with really good nutrient dense, meal with maybe some protein, healthy fat and fiber. Take your herbs. You could even add herbs to food, right? Add a little parsley, chop parsley to your scrambled eggs in the morning. really nutritive and really good way to get in some of those trace minerals that can actually help with regulating our nervous system. There's so many ways you can really support your body, and I want you to think about it in that way when it comes to food. We're really giving our body what it needs to do the things it needs to do and stay regulated in our nervous system. And that is the foundation for shifting your relationship with food. You can recite mantras all day long or try to meal plan and change the way that you're shopping for food, but if you're in a state of a dysregulated nervous system, this fight or flight response, we cannot override that with our willpower. And I think that's really important to note because we often think if I can just change my behavior, I'm just going to do better tomorrow, then I can shift this. But often, what is really driving these coping mechanisms we may have around food isn't something we can just shift by planning better or using our willpower. It really is about shifting our internal nervous system biology. So we have a place of regulation. We have more capacity for handling whatever comes up in our life. And we find we don't need to reach for food or try to put up these kind of arbitrary rules around food because we find that we have a better relationship with food on an internal level. And that's really what I want for you. So I hope as you are maybe thinking about improving your diet, eating better, feeling better, you'll start by working with regulating your nervous system. Maybe even start with a little herbal support with some of those nervines and nootropics and adaptogens as well that can really help us to find a place of regulation and accessing our parasympathetic response where all the good things we want in our life are more accessible because we have the capacity that we're looking for to bring them to pass. Hi, Michelle. Thank you for joining me today, and I will see you next time.